The grand chamber of the Xylo's hegemony was a place of crushing silence. It was a void carved from the heart of a captured asteroid, its walls polished obsidian that drank the light of the holographic star field, suspended in the center of the vast, circular room. The stars were not a map of conquest, as they once had been, but a display of failure. A single, insignificant sector glowed with a faint, sickly red, a wound in the otherwise perfect azure tapestry of their dominion. At the heart of this chamber, on a raised dais of solid, unadorned stone, stood Grand Admiral Kalen. He was a statue of defeat, his gray, segmented carapace rigid, his multifaceted eyes fixed on the cold, fathomless gaze of the Archon who presided over the synod of strategists. For millennia, the Xylos had known only victory. Their logic was irrefutable, their doctrines perfected over countless campaigns against 1,000 lesser species. They were the architects of order in a chaotic galaxy, their fleets a silver tide that washed away dissonance and inefficiency. They did not hate, for hate was an illogical emotion. They did not revel in cruelty, for cruelty served no strategic purpose. They simply expanded, assimilated, and corrected, their actions as inevitable and dispassionate as the gravitational pull of a star. Yet, here stood Kalen, the architect of their greatest fleet, the executor of their most absolute doctrine, and the sole witness to a failure so profound it defied the very principles of their existence. The air, thick with unspoken judgment, vibrated with the low hum of the chamber's life support. Before him sat the synod, their chitinous forms arrayed in a semicircle of ascending tiers, each member a legend in the arts of war, logistics, and galactic statecraft. Their stillness was more terrifying than any weapon Kalen had ever faced. It was High Strategist Viker who finally fractured the silence. His voice was like the grinding of tectonic plates, slow, deep, and filled with immense pressure. You were given a swarm that eclipsed suns, Grand Admiral. You commanded a force so overwhelming that the target system's star was a mere speck against the shadow of your vanguard. The doctrine was clear: total saturation, immediate compliance, and systematic integration. You were to face a species of primitive, soft-bodied bipeds who had barely learned to chain their own atoms for power. Their fleet, by our most generous estimates, was a splinter, a footnote in our sensor logs. Viker leaned forward, his multifaceted eyes narrowing into piercing points of light. The data reports a 99% loss of operational capacity across your entire command. Not destroyed, not rooted, rendered inert. The most powerful armada in the history of the hegemony was silenced. You were outnumbered 100 to 1 in their favor, yet you report that we were defeated. Explain this impossibility. Explain it in a way that does not sound like madness or treason. Kalen did not flinch. His mandibles remained tightly clenched, a sign of immense internal control. He had replayed the events in his mind a billion times, the data streams a phantom torrent behind his eyes. The logic held, and yet the conclusion was impossible. That was the core of the terror, a terror that still lingered in the deepest recesses of his consciousness, a cold, alien emotion he was only just beginning to name. High Strategist, Kalen began, his voice raspy, a dry whisper in the cavernous space. The data does not capture the truth. It records events, but not their nature. It logs the cessation of our weapon systems, the collapse of our energy grids, the scrambling of our navigation. What it does not and cannot convey is the texture of the engagement, the feeling of being dismantled, piece by piece, by a force that was not there. He raised one of his 4 slender arms, gesturing to the holographic wound in their star map. We arrived in the system they call Sol. Our fleet translated from warp space in perfect formation, a crescent of absolute power that spanned the orbit of their 5th planet. We were a wall of steel and energy, our presence alone intended to shatter their will. We expected fear. We expected a panicked, disorderly response. Or perhaps a foolish, honor-bound charge from their insignificant navy. We were prepared for any logical reaction. He paused, the memory coiling in his gut like a venomous serpent. We received none. Instead, we received silence. For a full cycle, their fleet, a thin, scattered line of vessels that looked more like artisanal trinkets than warships, held their position beyond the orbit of their 3rd planet. They did not power weapons. They did not raise shields to maximum. They simply waited, and they broadcasted. A flicker of contempt crossed Viker's features. A broadcast? You were paralyzed by a message from a presentient species. It was not a message in any form we could recognize, Kalen countered, his voice gaining a sliver of its former authority. It was not language, it was not data, it was music. a symphony of complex mathematical expressions woven into auditory patterns. It was profoundly intricate, beautiful, and utterly unnerving. Our translation algorithms failed. Our cryptographers were baffled. It was a signal of pure, unadulterated intellect, but with no discernible purpose. It felt less like a communication and more like an observation. As if they were not addressing us, but were simply expressing their own existence in our presence. The Archon, silent until now, shifted its immense frame. The movement was slight, but it sent a ripple of tension through the Synod. The aesthetics of our enemy's broadcasts are irrelevant, Admiral. Detail the military failure. Kalen bowed his head slightly. As you command, Archon. Adhering to doctrine, I disregarded the broadcast as a primitive intimidation tactic. I gave the order. The first wave was to be a demonstration, a targeted strike on their outermost moon, a lifeless rock, to show our precision and power without needless slaughter. 1,000 lances of pure energy, synchronized to strike a single point, a statement of our superiority. His multifaceted eyes unfocused, lost in the phantom light of that moment. The lances fired. For a microsecond, they traveled a perfectly straight path. And then they bent. They diverged, not wildly, but with a subtle, impossible grace, as if the very fabric of spacetime had become fluid around them. They curved around the moon, missing it by a precise, uniform margin, and dissipated harmlessly into the void. It was not a malfunction. Our systems reported a perfect firing solution and a perfect discharge. It was as if the universe itself had politely disagreed with our actions. A low murmur, like the shifting of sand, passed through the Synod. Such a thing was a violation of known physics. It was heresy against the predictable, logical universe the Xylos had mastered. We registered no energy shields, Kalen continued, his voice dropping lower. No gravitational anomalies, no technology we could detect. The humans simply watched, and their music continued. I conferred with my strategists. The consensus was an unknown form of localized reality warping, but the energy signature was non-existent. It was impossible. We proceeded to the second phase, a full barrage against their fleet, overwhelming firepower. Saturation of the entire sector with plasma, disruptive torpedoes, and kinetic slugs traveling at fractions of light speed. He took a deep, shuddering breath, the memory still raw. This is what the data logs show as the engagement. It was not an engagement. It was a dissection. Our torpedoes, armed with warheads capable of cracking continental plates, went inert. Their guidance systems failed simultaneously, turning them into cold, dead metal. Our plasma cannons flared and died, their energy conduits inexplicably drained. Our kinetic slugs, tools of brute, undeniable physics, were deflected by minute, perfectly timed gravitational pulses that seemed to emanate from nowhere at all. They did not counter our attacks. They undid them. They treated our weapons not as threats, but as complex equations to be solved and canceled out. He looked directly at Viker, whose rigid posture had become a statue of disbelief. Imagine, high strategist, your every thought, every command, every calculated strategy being predicted and neutralized the instant it is conceived. Our formations, the pride of the hegemony, became a liability. Ships that turned to port found their thrusters firing in the wrong sequence, sending them into uncontrolled spins. Fire control systems locked onto friendly vessels. Communications devolved into a storm of static and echoes of our own commands, played back to us with a half-second delay. We were not fighting a fleet. We were fighting the very concept of order, and we were losing. Within minutes, Kalen's voice was barely a whisper now, my fleet was a helpless constellation of dark, silent hulls. Our engines were cold, our weapons were useless. Our command network was a phantom limb, twitching with signals that meant nothing. We were adrift, surrounded by the enemy, completely at their mercy. And still they did not fire. The music stopped, and a new signal came. He paused, letting the weight of the moment settle in the silent chamber. The Synod waited, their collective gaze an immense, unblinking eye. This time, Kalen said, it was a language they had somehow extrapolated from our own internal communications chatter during the battle. It was perfectly structured, grammatically flawless. The voice was calm, devoid of triumph or malice. It simply said, "We see you. We do not understand your intent, but we cannot allow you to proceed. We invite you to speak, to understand." The chamber was so quiet Kalen could hear the faint, rhythmic pulse of his own circulatory system. D delivered his report. He had described the impossible. Now he awaited judgment. Viker rose slowly to his full, imposing height. Admiral Kalen, what you describe is not a battle. It is a fairy tale, a hallucination brought on by fear or an elaborate fiction to conceal your own incompetence. You claim this primitive race possesses technology that can rewrite physics at will, predict our every move, and learn our language in minutes from stray signal leakage. You claim they defeated the Grand Armada without firing a single shot. This is an insult to logic. It is the truth, Kalen said, his voice firm for the first time. A truth I witnessed with my own senses. A truth confirmed by the silent, powerless fleet that now drifts in that cursed system. A truth that our science has no explanation for. Then I will offer one, Viker retorted, his voice booming through the chamber. You encountered a remnant of a precursor race, an automated defense system left behind by a civilization long dead. These humans are nothing but vermin squatting in a house they did not build, protected by ghosts they do not understand. You were not defeated by them, but by an echo of a power far beyond their comprehension. This does not change the doctrine. It merely changes the tools required for extermination. We will send a second, larger fleet. We will analyze this defensive system, dismantle it, and then we will scrub that third planet clean of the biological infestation that has dared to inconvenience the hegemony. Kalen felt a chill that had nothing to do with the chamber's temperature. It was the chill of Xylo's logic, so perfect, so unyielding, and in this one instance, so catastrophically wrong. They could not see it. They were trapped by millennia of certainty. They saw a problem to be solved with more force, not a context to be understood. You are wrong, high strategist, Kalen said, his words a direct challenge, an act of near insubordination. I have accepted their invitation. A wave of shock, visible as a subtle, collective rustle of carapaces, washed over the synod. Viker stared, his mandibles agape in disbelief. You, what? You communicated with the enemy? You boarded their vessel? I did, Kalen confirmed. Against all protocol, because protocol had failed, because logic had failed, I determined that new data was required and the only source was the anomaly itself. I took a shuttle, alone. I went to them to understand how we were defeated. He looked up at the Archon, whose gaze was unreadable, ancient, and deep. And what I found was not a precursor weapon. It was not an automated system. It was them. It was the humans, and they are not what we believe them to be. They are something other, something our doctrines have no name for. The Archon remained motionless, a mountain of silent authority. After a long, agonizing moment it spoke, its voice a low, resonant thrum that seemed to emanate from the very stone of the chamber. Proceed, Grand Admiral, tell us what you found. Omit no detail. The fate of the hegemony may depend on the clarity of your memory. Kalen took a steadying breath, the weight of that pronouncement settling upon him. He was no longer just a defeated admiral on trial. He was a messenger from a new reality, and he had to make them understand, before their arrogance led them to an extinction they could not even comprehend. He had to make them see the humans as he now saw them, not as primitives, not as warriors, but as something far more terrifying and perhaps far more magnificent. The human vessel was an affront to every principle of Xylo's engineering. His shuttle, a sleek, angular craft of polished metal and hard lines, had docked within a cavernous bay that felt less like a military hangar and more like a terrarium. The air was warm, humid, and smelled of soil, water, and growing things. Green, leafy organisms climbed the curved, pearlescent walls, and the light was not the cold, efficient blue-white of a Xylo's ship, but a soft, golden hue that mimicked the dawn of a terrestrial world. There were no visible conduits, no exposed machinery, no sense of the raw, controlled power that pulsed beneath the deck plates of his own flagship. It was a place of quiet, organic life, a sanctuary that masqueraded as a warship. He was met not by armored soldiers, but by a single human. It was smaller than he had anticipated, its form soft and vulnerable, lacking any natural armor. It wore simple, loose-fitting gray fabric. Its face, a collection of soft tissues and expressive muscles, was utterly alien. It was a female of their species, and her name, she said, was Eva Rostova. She held the title of captain, yet she carried no weapon and was flanked by no guards. Her demeanor was one of profound, unnerving calm. Grand Admiral Kalen, she had said, her voice the same one from the broadcast, perfectly modulated, the Xylo's consonants and vowels pronounced with an accuracy that should have been. Impossible. Welcome, we are grateful you chose dialogue over continued conflict. He had remained silent, his senses overwhelmed. The sheer wrongness of the environment was disorienting. A warship should be a machine of focused purpose, every surface, every corridor designed for maximum efficiency in combat. This place felt like a park, a temple, a home. It was illogical. Your vessel, it is not what we expected, Kalen had managed. his translator implant converting his own harsh, clicking syllables into the soft, flowing sounds of her language. "Our ships are extensions of ourselves," Rostova replied, a slight, enigmatic tilt to her lips that he would later learn was called a smile. "They are ecosystems as much as they are machines. We find that life is more resilient, more adaptable than sterile metal. It promotes a different kind of thought." She led him from the bay into a corridor that wound like a natural tunnel, its walls glowing with a soft, internal luminescence. There were no hard angles, only gentle curves. Periodically, they passed openings that looked out not into the stardusted void, but into vast, cylindrical chambers filled with forests, fields, and bodies of water, all contained within the ship's hull. The scale was staggering. This was not a vessel carrying a crew, it was a vessel carrying a world. "You defeated us," Kalen stated, forcing the conversation back to the point of his visit. "You neutralized the most powerful military force in this quadrant of the galaxy without firing a shot. Our analysts theorize you are using technology left by a more ancient, powerful race." Rostova stopped and turned to face him fully. Her eyes, two dark, liquid orbs, held his gaze. There was no arrogance in them, only a deep, weary placidity. "It is a logical assumption from your perspective. You see technology as an external tool, a device to be built, wielded, and mastered. It is understandable that you would seek a technological explanation for what happened." "Is it not?" Kalen pressed. "A reality-warping field, a predictive computational matrix of unheard-of complexity, a network of gravitational emitters." "Yes and no," she said, resuming her unhurried pace. "We do not use technology in that manner. We are, in a sense, the technology. What you witnessed was not a weapon, it was an expression of will." They arrived in a circular chamber at the heart of the ship. It was a place of observation. The ceiling was a perfect, transparent dome, revealing the stardusted blackness of space. In the distance, Kalen could see his own fleet, a silent, dead city of Xylo's might, each ship a monument to his failure. And below, hanging in the void like a sapphire and pearl, was the third planet, Earth. "For generations," Rostova began, her voice taking on a more formal, instructional tone, "our species was defined by conflict. We warred with each other over land, resources, ideology. Our minds were a storm of individual desires, fears, and ambitions. We were a cacophony. But as our understanding of the universe grew, we began to see the patterns, the connections. We learned that consciousness was not merely a byproduct of biology, but a fundamental aspect of reality itself. We learned that a single, isolated mind is a whisper, but that minds, when truly unified, can become a voice that speaks with the universe." She gestured toward the dome. "What your fleet encountered was not a ship's crew, it was a species. Every human on this vessel and on every vessel in our fleet contributed to a single, coherent state of consciousness. We call it the chorus. It is a network not of machines, but of minds linked at a quantum level. Through it, we do not merely share thoughts, we achieve a unified awareness." Kalen felt a tremor of true, intellectual fear. This was beyond technology. This was a state of being his people had never even conceived of. The Xylos were a collective society, yes, but one built on rigid hierarchy and obedience to doctrine. The idea of a fluid, voluntary union of minds into a single, thinking entity was blasphemous. "This chorus, it predicted our strategies?" he asked, his voice low. "It did not need to predict," Rostova corrected gently. "Prediction implies uncertainty. When you were formulating a command, your mind and the minds of your command staff created a specific set of neural patterns. Those patterns, however subtle, create a ripple in the quantum foam, just as any event does. The chorus is sensitive enough to perceive those ripples an instant before they resolve into action. We did not guess what you were going to do. We knew because on a fundamental level, the intention and the action are part of the same quantum event. We were simply observing a process as it unfolded." Kalen stared at her, the full implication of her words crashing down on him. They had been transparent. Their every thought, every strategy debated in the sterile security of his flagship's command bridge had been laid bare to the humans before it was ever executed. They were not fighting an enemy. They were a book being read by a silent, patient observer. "And our weapons?" he asked, the words catching in his throat. "The lances that bent, the torpedoes that died." "Every system on your ships operates according to physical laws," she explained. "Every energy transfer, every chemical reaction, every computational process. These are all chains of cause and effect. The chorus can perceive these chains with near-perfect clarity. To disable a torpedo, we do not need to attack it with a counterweapon." We simply need to introduce a single, precise piece of dissonant information into its guidance system, a packet of code, a stray neutrino, a focused electromagnetic pulse so minute your sensors would register it as background noise. We find the linchpin of the system and gently nudge it. Your weapons did not fail. Their internal logic was simply persuaded to arrive at a different conclusion. Your lances were not blocked. Their trajectory was redefined by a subtle alteration of the localized gravitational constant, a whisper of influence on the fabric of spacetime. It requires less energy than lighting this room. She turned from the viewport and looked at him, her expression softening with something he could not name. It might have been pity. Grand Admiral, we did not defeat you. We disassembled your capacity to do harm. It was the most ethical course of action we could conceive. We could have destroyed your fleet. The same principles that allowed us to neutralize your weapons could have been used to turn them against you, or to overload your reactors, or to simply deconstruct your hulls atom by atom. But that is not our way. Destruction is inefficient. It creates chaos. It ends the possibility of understanding. Kalen stood in silence for a long time, processing the sheer, paradigm-shattering scale of what she was telling him. The Xylos saw the universe as a resource to be ordered and controlled through the application of overwhelming force. The humans saw it as a symphony of information to be understood and harmonized with. Their power was not in their ships or their weapons, but in their unity, their perception, their consciousness. His fleet had not brought weapons to a fight. They had brought abacuses to a battle against a quantum computer. Why? Kalen finally asked, the single word carrying the weight of his entire civilization's confusion. Why reveal this to me? Why not simply send us away, crippled and ignorant? Because your arrival was not a surprise, Rostova said, her voice dropping, becoming graver. We have been watching the hegemony for a long time. We have seen your expansion, your methods, your unyielding logic. We understand your desire for order. In a way, we share it. But your methods are based on a flawed premise. That order must be imposed. We have learned that true, lasting order must emerge from understanding and consent. She walked toward a console that seemed to grow out of the floor like a mushroom. A holographic image bloomed in the air above it. It was a map of the galaxy, far more detailed than the one in the Xylos' grand chamber. We did this to stop you, she said. Not to conquer you, not to punish you, but to stop you from continuing down a path that would eventually lead to your own stagnation or destruction. And because we need you to understand, we need you to see the universe as we do, because there are things in the void far older and far less comprehensible than either of us. Kalen looked from her face to the star map. He finally understood the terror he had felt. It was not the fear of destruction. It was the fear of insignificance. The Xylos' hegemony, for all its power, for all its millennia of conquest, was a child playing with stones on the shore of an infinite ocean. And the humans, these soft, fragile beings, were the ones who had learned to read the tides. Back in the grand chamber, the silence that followed Kalen's testimony was different. It was not the silence of judgment, but of profound, collective shock. He had laid bare the truth of their defeat, and in doing so had shattered the very foundation of Xylos' identity. Their logic, their doctrine, their belief in their own supremacy, all of it was rendered obsolete. High Strategist Viker stood frozen, his earlier arrogance replaced by a stunned, horrified stillness. He, a master of 1,000 war games, a strategist whose mind was a fortress of logic, could not process a foe who won not by outmaneuvering or outgunning him, but by comprehending him so completely that conflict became a pointless exercise. He had planned for every contingency except the one where the rules of reality itself were a weapon in his enemy's hands. It was one of the silent lorekeepers, an ancient Xylos named Lyra whose carapace was scarred with the ceremonial marks of her order, who spoke first. Her voice was thin and dry, like tea. He rustling of ancient scrolls. What the Grand Admiral describes is a paradigm of existence we have never encountered. We have fought empires of energy, swarms of biological constructs, machines of crystalline intelligence. All of them operated within the known laws of physics. All could be understood as systems to be analyzed and defeated. These humans, they are not a system. They are an awareness. To fight them is to fight an idea. Viker finally moved, turning slowly to face the lorekeeper. An idea can be broken. A philosophy can be discredited. Can it? Lyra countered, her gaze unwavering. They did not break us. They showed us we were already broken. Our unity is one of command. Theirs is one of consensus. Our power is projection. Theirs is perception. They have not evolved a better weapon, High Strategist. They have evolved into a better state of being. To continue to view them as a military problem is a failure of the imagination, and it will be our end. The weight of her words settled over the synod. They were strategists, warriors, and governors. Their entire existence was predicated on the idea of problems to be solved through superior logistics and force. The notion that the greatest threat they had ever faced was one that could not be fought, only understood, was a chasm opening beneath their feet. The Archon had remained silent throughout, its immense form unmoving, its thoughts hidden behind the obsidian calm of its eyes. Now it stirred. The low thrum of its voice filled the chamber, silencing all other thought. "Grand Admiral Kalen," the Archon said, its voice resonating with an authority that was absolute. "You violated protocol. You surrendered your person to an unknown, hostile power. You acted without the consent of this synod. By all the laws of the hegemony, you are guilty of treason." Kalen lowered his head, accepting the judgment. He had known this was the price of his actions. "However," the Archon continued, the word hanging in the air, "you also brought us a truth that 1,000 fleets could not have discovered. You have shown us the limits of our own logic. You have forced us to look into the mirror they held up and see our own reflection for the first time in millennia. The doctrine is obsolete. Our understanding is incomplete. The hegemony must evolve or it will perish." The Archon turned its gaze upon Viker. "High Strategist, your proposal to send a second fleet is rescinded. Your logic is sound only within the confines of our old understanding. You cannot solve a new equation with an old formula. You are relieved of your command in this matter." Viker bowed stiffly, his posture rigid with a humiliation that was deeper than any physical wound. The Archon then looked at Kalen. "Grand Admiral, you are no longer a prisoner. You are our envoy. You are the only one among us who has looked into their eyes, the only one who has begun to understand. You will return to the humans. You will not offer terms of surrender, nor will you beg for an alliance. You will open a dialogue. You will learn. You will convey to them that the Xylos hegemony is capable of more than just conquest, that we too can learn to listen." A current of disbelief ran through the chamber, but no one dared to speak. The Archon's word was law. It was a decision that would redirect the entire course of their civilization. It was an admission of fallibility that no Xylos had ever uttered. Kalen felt a surge of something he had not felt since he was a young soldier generations ago. It was not victory. It was hope, a fragile, terrifying hope. "I will do as you command, Archon." As he prepared to leave, a priority communique chimed softly in the chamber. A direct, encrypted channel from the human flagship, routed to him by the Archon's own decree. It was Captain Rostova's voice, as calm and clear as before. "Grand Admiral," the voice said, audible to all in the chamber, "we are pleased with the direction of your council. We believed you were capable of reaching this conclusion. True logic, after all, must eventually embrace new data, however unsettling." The casual omniscience of her statement sent a fresh wave of awe and fear through the synod. They had been observed, even here in the heart of their power. "I am opening this channel for one final reason," Rostova continued, her tone shifting, losing its warmth, becoming something colder, more universal. "To share the reason for our urgency, the reason we could not allow your fleet to continue its campaign of distraction. It is the reason the chorus came to be." The holographic star map in the center of the room flickered. The image of the galaxy remained, but a new set of data began to overlay it. It was not the territory of an empire or the trajectory of a fleet. It was a creeping, spreading stain of nothing, a void within the void. It emanated from the intergalactic darkness, a region beyond their own galactic rim, and it was slowly, inexorably advancing. It was a zone of absolute silence. "For some time now," Rostova's voice explained, "our chorus has been listening, not just to the stars and the planets, but to the deeper hum of the universe, the background radiation, the quantum foam, the symphony of existence itself. And we have detected a dissonance. A silence that is not merely the absence of sound, but an active, aggressive negation of it. A force that consumes information, that erases patterns, that unwrites reality." On the map, the stain of blackness touched a small, distant nebula. The nebula did not explode. It simply vanished from the map. The light, the energy, the matter, all of it ceased to be registered by the human sensors. Its signature was gone, as if it had never existed. "I do not know what it is," Rostova said, her calm voice now laced with a profound cosmic gravity. "A natural entropic phenomenon, a weapon of a power we cannot imagine, or an entity whose existence is predicated on the consumption of reality itself. We call it the Great Silence, and it is coming. All of our models, all of our observations show that it is accelerating. It does not travel through space in a conventional sense. It expands, converting spacetime itself into a null state. The members of the Synod stared at the map, their millennia of strategic thinking, their plans for conquest and order, suddenly feeling like the squabbles of infants in the face of an oncoming tidal wave. Their war, their entire history, was a footnote. "We did not evolve the chorus to fight you Xylos," Rostova's voice concluded, and for the first time it held a trace of something that sounded like pleading. "We evolved it to listen, to understand, and what we have understood is that no single species, no single empire can face this. The cacophony of individual minds of warring species will be silenced one by one. The only chance for survival for any life is a greater chorus. A symphony of civilizations, united in awareness, that can learn to sing a song louder than the silence." The transmission ended. The star map remained, the creeping void a silent, terrifying testament to her words. Grand Admiral Kalen stood on the dais, no longer a defeated soldier but something else entirely. The fear he had felt facing the humans was a pale, insignificant thing compared to the abyss that now opened in his mind. He looked at the faces of the Synod, at the humbled form of Vicar, at the ancient, thoughtful gaze of the Archon. He saw his own terror reflected in their eyes. They had been so proud of their dominance, so certain of their logic. They had set out to conquer a galaxy, only to learn that their galaxy was a fragile island in a sea of encroaching nothingness. And their saviors, their only hope, were the very beings they had intended to enslave, a species that had looked upon the infinite chaos of the cosmos and instead of forging a bigger sword, had learned to listen. He had gone to Saul to understand how his fleet was defeated. He had returned with the knowledge of a war that had not yet begun, a war for existence itself, where the only weapon that mattered was the unity his people had never truly understood. The humans had not just defeated the Xylos' hegemony, they had given it a reason to live.